Russia's ambassador to the United Nations has informed the press that the United States has expelled 12 diplomats from his mission, a position that SABC News has yet to confirm with either the State Department or the United States mission to the UN. Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia was speaking at the near conclusion of Russia's presidency of the Security Council, which ends at midnight tonight. This is the General Assembly continues to hold emergency special session on Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Just received information that the U.S. authorities have undertaken another hostile action against the Russian mission to the United Nations, grossly violating their commitments on the host country agreement that they undertook, telling us that they are announcing 12 people from the personnel of the Russian mission, persona non grata, and demanding that they will leave by the 7th of March.
UN diplomats?
Yes. UN diplomats. They just visited the Russian mission and gave us a note prescribing us to do what they demand.
Well, to tell us a little bit more about the press conference, let's cross now to our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Brycebees. Sherwin, thanks for joining us. Any more information on the expulsion of Russian diplomats?
We were sitting in a press conference with Vasily Nebenzia, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations. The premise of the press conference was to talk about their term in the Security Council. Their presidency, of course, comes to an end at midnight tonight. He then paused the press conference, Peter, and said he had to take a call. And so I said to him, you can take the call, but you have to tell us who's on the phone afterwards. And he did. He told us that he'd just been informed that 12 UN diplomats associated with the Russian mission to the United Nations had been expelled by the United States. One imagines this has to do with the ongoing military incursion into Ukraine. We have not been able to verify this information. We've reached out to the spokesperson for the US mission to the UN. She has not responded. We have reached out to the State Department. We haven't heard back. There seems to be a lot of confusion around the announcement because it didn't come from Washington. It didn't come from the mission in New York. It came from the Russian ambassador. So we have to verify this information to confirm that what he is saying is true and understand what the permutations around this announcement is. But it would, though, Peter, speak to a broader a tightening of the screws, if you would, in the absence of a military response from Western nations to what is happening in Ukraine. The sanctions, the direct targeted sanctions against President Putin himself, against Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. We are hearing that the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ have stopped trading in the stocks of companies based in Russia. UEFA has moved the Champions League final from St. Petersburg in Russia, and so we hear more and more about the response, the soft power response, if you will, to the aggression we are witnessing in Ukraine, in addition, of course, to the diplomatic tracks, right? The initial contacts between the Ukrainian and the Russian delegations on the Belarusian border earlier today. We're hearing that there was some positive sentiment. The groups have gone back to their capitals, and hopefully there will be a second iteration of that meeting. There is a special session of the UN General Assembly currently underway, where the Western nations certainly in the main would like to see Russia isolated within the 193 member body that is the General Assembly. How the chips will fall in terms of that vote that is expected on Wednesday, in terms of a draft resolution that is now currently under negotiation within the Assembly, it's too early to say. There is also now a UN Security Council meeting that is underway at this moment, looking specifically at the humanitarian situation and the implications of what this would mean down the road if this conflict were not brought to heel in the short term. And so there's so much going on right now in terms of the international response to what we are seeing on the ground in Ukraine. It's sometimes difficult to keep up, Peter.
Well, the Russian ambassadors are working really hard, I guess, to try and fight back. And in this exchange, you had a chat with him about his counter-punching, and some of those taken on by the Secretary General, amongst others.
Well, our role, I think, in situations like this as journalists is really to ask questions and to probe what is presented to us as facts. You have different sides to a conflict of this nature. You have different perspectives, different positions. You have to sift through what is propaganda and what is truth. If COVID-19 taught us anything, it taught us that we have to get to the facts and understand the science and give our viewers the best information possible. So the Russians have been calling for the denazification of Ukraine. And the Russians have also taken a very firm position at the UN Secretary General's defense of the UN Charter, right, which calls for the resolution of international disputes through a peaceful means. So his defense of the Charter has not sat well with the Russians. This was my exchange with Vasily Nebenzia a short time ago. Watch. Can you talk about your relationship with the Secretary General, right? We saw you in the General Assembly on Wednesday. You had a very animated discussion. We couldn't read lips, but we certainly saw the body language. There's been a lot of criticism. And the UN argues that essentially all he's doing is defending the UN Charter that says states must settle their disputes through peaceful means, which is not happening here. So that's one issue. What should the SG do in this instance? And in addition to that, this notion of the denazification of Ukraine. Ukraine has a Jewish president. So it just beggars belief that you are talking about Nazis in removing Nazis in Ukraine when the president himself is a Jew.
There was a criticism on my part, on our part, of the Secretary General for the position he took on the crisis. I do not recall, as I said to him directly and then out loud, that he took similar positions in similar cases, and there were many, in fact. Syria, take other examples. There were many where his position was much more subdued, but there was no body language, rest assured. That was a criticism within the diplomatic protocol, which I think I didn't overstep. On the fact that Zelensky has Jewish heritage, it doesn't matter because real power in Ukraine, real political weight, belongs to the radicals and neo-Nazis who defy the president, who have their own agenda, who rule the ball in Ukraine, in fact. And President Zelensky, who came with a landslide victory of 74% of the population, promising to end the war, first thing on the list of his priorities. But then he was slowly backing off this, and he finished practically playing into the hands of those radical and neo-Nazi organizations, which claim that they represent the patriotic part of the Ukrainian society. He demonstrated that he's weak, that he has no political will and power in the circumstances he found himself in to resist those radicals who are the main political driving force in today's Ukraine.
So you have the Russians that are saying that President Volodymyr Zelensky is weak. Of course, the sentiment on Zelensky is quite different in other parts of the world. We present the facts as we see them, Peter, and we let the viewers decide. In addition, of course, the Russians have said that the Secretary General, his statements have been incompatible with his status, incompatible with his mandate. The UN argues that all the Secretary General is doing is defending the UN Charter, which is his mandate.
I think you hinted already a little bit earlier that there are concerns around the humanitarian situation in Ukraine and that the Security Council is meeting on that issue. Have you learned anything that's come out of there?
Yeah, well, we've learned that the Europeans have put a draft resolution that we expect this draft resolution to be tabled tomorrow. Remember, Russia vetoed a draft resolution on Friday that called for its troops to be removed from Ukraine. They have that power again when it comes to a Security Council resolution that wants to affirm the central role of humanitarian law, right? We talk about human rights law and international human rights law and also international humanitarian law. The big concern, particularly from the UN Refugee Agency, whose executive director, the High Commissioner, briefed a short time ago, talking about how there were over 500,000 Ukrainian refugees in neighboring countries, and we've seen a figure of around 5 million projected if this war goes in a direction that not many people here would like to see it go. So the big concern is, where do we go if this is a prolonged conflict? You know, if Afghanistan is our guide, or Syria is our guide, or many of the other hotspots around the world, this does not improve the humanitarian situation. It will only devolve and get worse in a country and a world that is seeking to build back better and recover from the devastating consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic consequences that has wrought around the world. We are seeing the oil prices above $100. That has implications for the petrol price in countries like South Africa. We are seeing the refugee situation. This means pressure being placed on economies in the neighboring, in that region that can ill afford this right now. So the ripple effect here in terms of what happens to the global economy, that really doesn't have space. If you look at inflation around the world, right, that really doesn't have space for these shocks, these man-made shocks. That's a real big concern. So another resolution in the UN Security Council. Russia, of course, still has veto power. So again, we'll have to see how those chips fall, Peter.
Has there been any reaction to allegations that foreign nationals, in particular black Africans, have not been allowed to board trains and buses out of the Ukraine, heading for the border and being blocked at border crossings as well?
Well, it's difficult to deny the first-hand experiences that people have been sharing with us, black Africans in particular. We've seen the video, so it's very difficult to dismiss those. I was in a briefing with the EU ambassador earlier, the EU ambassador to the United Nations, and I raised this question with them, and they said they are aware of this, but they've not been able to verify it. But if it were true, it would be a problem, and it is something that they would address directly. The Polish ambassador was part of that emergency session in the ongoing emergency session in the General Assembly. He took the podium, of course, to denounce Russia, etc., but also addressed this issue of Africans in particular, and other nationalities, I might add, the Pakistanis, Uzbekis, Indians included in that, have been denied access onto buses and access onto trains that were taking people out of the country to the borders, where they then encountered further difficulty in crossing, particularly on the Poland border with Ukraine. This is what the Polish ambassador said in the GA earlier today. Watch.
We welcome people of 125 nationalities fleeing Ukraine to Poland. So that means it concerns us all. The list of these nationalities are too long to read to you. So I just read the first, those with more than 100 nationals fleeing to Poland only today in the morning. Ukraine, Uzbekistan, Nigeria, India, Morocco, Kazakhstan, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Poland, Belarus, Iran, Turkey, Algeria, and Russia. This refuge applies also to the students, which I understand is a serious concern of some colleagues here in the chamber. The students are also welcome to Poland, and they are offered to continue their studies in Poland. We know that some of the missions here in New York were targeted by the disinformation suggesting discriminatory practices at the Polish-Ukrainian border based on race and religion. I can tell you this is a complete lie and a terrible insult to us.
So some pushback there from the Polish ambassador, but of course from the African perspective, Peter, you and I can agree that we've seen this before, right? In Libya, for example, most recently after the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi and the migration that happens through Libya as a transit point to Europe, and what has been very clearly documented over a number of years in terms of how African migrants have been treated in Libya. And so it's certainly instructive as to how we position our thoughts in terms of our reaction to what we are hearing that is happening on the border, certainly with Ukraine. Pete.
All right, Sharon, perhaps as a final question, I mean, it is significant, isn't it? I mean, you've been around those corridors at the UN for a long time now, but this is your first emergency session, isn't it? The last one was 1982. That's how significant this conversation is, and I wonder if we know the African position at this session?
Well, on global issues, there is never one African position. Just ask the Palestinians or ask the Western Sahrawis about a united African position on issues that you would think were even closer, perhaps, to them than the Ukrainian matter. What we have seen is consensus within the African group, the A3, in the UN Security Council. Gabon, Ghana, Kenya have been quite emphatic in their repudiation of what Russia is doing in Ukraine. They have referenced the UN Charter, because it is the UN Charter that all member states should be basing their responses here. We talk about the historic relations between countries. We understand the close relationship that the African National Congress has had with the Russian, before that the USSR, and subsequently the Russian Federation. So there are also those bilateral relationships that will be factored into any decision that comes out of the special emergency session in the General Assembly. You're quite right. This hasn't happened many times that I've been in New York. The last time there was a special session of the General Assembly referred to it specifically by the UN Security Council, which is what happened in this instance, was in 1982, so 40 years ago. But there have been other special sessions of the General Assembly. I believe there was some in the early 1990s. I'm not sure what the topic was in that instance, but it's certainly been a long time since the Security Council referred a matter, because of the deadlock experienced in the Council, to the General Assembly. There can be no deadlock because there are no vetoes. The question is, how many countries will support this resolution? Is it going to be 100? Is it going to be 120? We have 193 member states. Russia's lobbying. Western nations are lobbying. Who's going to win out here? We don't know yet. We'll see on Wednesday.
Sherwin, that's where we'll leave it. Thanks very much indeed. That's our correspondent in New York, Sherwin Brycebees, giving us an update on this special emergency session called for by the UN Security Council for the first time in 40 years. And Russia, Ukraine were the first two to speak today, but we believe that we'll hear from a good number of countries. Not sure how many. I think there could be as many as 103 that are there.